Welcome to episode 193 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter Eddie Renner. He wrote Crepitus, a low-budget horror movie which is being released this month. He was instrumental in helping to raise the money for the film, and we dig into the specifics of exactly how he was able to do that as well. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 193. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. Quick few words about what I'm working on. So a quick update on The Pinch, which is the crime action thriller feature film that I am finishing up on. I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago called The Pinch, Producing a Micro Budget Feature Film, where I go into great detail on exactly how I wrote, directed, and produced this film. Specifically, I talk about how to write a micro-budgeted screenplay, how to raise money to shoot your micro-budget screenplay, which includes a lot of information about how to run a successful Kickstarter campaign, which is something I did for The Pinch. And then I also dig into pre-production, production, and of course post-production. The webinar is over 3 hours long, so there's a ton of useful information in there. I worked hard putting this webinar together, so I am charging a small fee to view it. But if you're looking to write, direct, and or produce a micro-budget film, I think this could really help you out. There are a ton of directors and producers out there looking for the next great micro-budget script. So even if you're just a writer who's looking to understand this market better, I think this webinar could potentially be very valuable to you as well. I think writing scripts that can be shot on a micro-budget level is a great way to meet up-and-coming directors and producers and get some produced writing credits. So I think this is a great avenue for writers to pursue just in general. You can find this webinar at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/thepinch, and the word The Pinch is just all one word, all lowercase. I will, of course, link to this in the show notes as well. So the other thing I'm working on is a comedy pilot TV script. I talked about the drama thriller TV pilot script and show Bible that I wrote for a producer in August. Well, this is another assignment from the same producer. I wrote the show Bible for this one also in July, and now I am tasked with writing up the pilot episode. I'm nearly halfway done with the pilot episode, so I'm hoping to have a draft of that done by the end of September. This one is a half-hour kids comedy show, so it's totally different than the drama thriller TV episode that I wrote in August. It's actually been a lot of fun. I just have to keep the comedy clean and family friendly, which isn't always easy, as sometimes the adult joke is the easiest one to just kind of grab. So, you just got to come up with good jokes that are presentable to a family. So it's been fun, and as I said, I'm hoping to get this episode done by the end of September, and then hopefully they'll be able to start taking it out to the various contacts that they have. Anyway, so that's what I'm working on. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter Eddie Renner. Here is the interview. Welcome, Eddie, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast over the last several weeks.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So to start out, maybe you can give us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you get interested in the entertainment industry? I
grew up in Sheboygan, Michigan, a small little town at the tip of the mitt. If a lot of people might not get that phrase, but it's in a very touristy type of area, and I've always enjoyed film. I've always liked to watch film, particularly horror and sci-fi, and I've been working as a caricature artist for the last 21 years, and a good friend of mine who had graduated school out in LA, the Institute for Directing and Lighting and Editing, was working on some local short films, and he I had known this kid for a long time. His name's Haynes Whitmore, who was the director of Crepitus, and he approached me about doing some storyboards for one of his short films that he was working on, and that's kind of how I started working with him. And from there, it went on to he asked me if I would be interested in maybe helping to edit one of his screenplays and maybe add a little bit of creativity to it, and that's how I eventually moved into screenwriting.
I see. Perfect. So now, just back up just a little bit. How did you meet Haynes originally? Was he someone you went to school with? Is that what you said?
Yeah, we went to school together. I've known him for quite a few years before we had ever had any aspirations of working together professionally.
Okay, but then he went on, whatever, like an undergraduate you guys were, and then he went on to film school out in LA, but you didn't go to film school with him.
No, I've never been to school for film.
Okay.
I've been to school for art, but not for film.
Okay, perfect. So let's dig into Crepitus, starring Bill Moseley, and kind of talk about that story. So now you have met Haynes, you're doing storyboard. Do you have a bunch of ideas? Like, had you been thinking some ideas, you start talking to Haynes? Maybe just walk us through that process of kind of how you got to writing the script.
Well, at the time we were working on a project called Asylum of Secrets, and we had done some short films together. I'd worked, like you said, storyboards, and we were working on this particular project, and it became pretty obvious that, considering that we wanted it to be a feature film, that in order to do this particular story properly, we would need a budget beyond what beginning filmmakers would be able to achieve, So we decided to put that project on hold, and we met at a restaurant and we bounced a few ideas around to try to come up with a concept that could be shot very well for a micro budget. We wanted to actually write the screenplay specifically so that, one location, a handful of characters, and that's how Crepitus was born. We kind of also knew that we loved the clown genre, and we wanted to write a story based around some type of clown. Mm-hmm. And after a couple of hours of bouncing some ideas across, we came up with the basic skeleton of what Crepitus would eventually become.
Okay, and maybe you can just stop here and give us a quick log line or pitch. It sounds like there is a clown involved with Crepitus, but maybe give us kind of the full log line for it.
Crepitus is based around two kids who have recently moved into their deceased grandfather's house, and they quickly discover that there are strange things happening in the house, noises, tappings, and not only is what they soon discover terrifying, but they also live with their mother, who is an incredibly abusive, terrible person. So they start to search for clues about what's happening in this house, and eventually become face-to-face with Crepitus while trying to survive life with their mother at the same time.
Okay. And so you start out, you had some sort of, I would say almost sort of logistical needs, as it had to be in one location and, as you said, be able to be shot on a micro budget. But where did just the story sort of idea come from? Was this just sort of a story that percolated? Where did these characters and sort of the genesis of that story come from?
Well, it's also, listening to a few of your podcasts in the past, I noticed that a lot of different writers have different processes for how they develop a story. A lot of people rely very heavily on outlines, where they come up with the real strong structure of the story first. And where others, like I believe the guy who wrote Bone Tomahawk, said that he loves to just come up with the basic idea and then start writing and let the story evolve as he writes. And that's exactly how Crepitus went. We came up with an idea that we knew there had to be a scary supernatural creature that just happened to be a clown, and we wanted it to be in a house, and we knew that we wanted there to be both supernatural and tangible aspects to the horror. So we knew that there would be the clown, and they knew there would be the mother, the abuse, the child abuse, that would add a more tangible horror aspect. And from there, we came up with some characters' names. My wife, who did help me write the script, named all the characters, and her and I sat around and we brainstormed about these different characters, and we even talked, breathed a little bit of life into them and their backstories, and then I just started writing.
Okay, perfect.
And the story developed over that. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about specifically your writing process. In your initial email where we were talking, it sounded like since you had never written a script, you're basically now tasked with writing this micro-budget script. You did a lot of research before you actually started writing. Maybe you can talk us through that process. What exactly did you research? What books did you read? Maybe there's some books you recommend, some books you don't recommend, some websites you recommend, websites you don't recommend. Just all of that process, the good stuff and maybe the bad stuff.
Well, I guess I only have one recommendation. That's Sid Field's screenplay.
Okay.
I did read through that. Aside from that particular book, I would type in how to write a screenplay. Screenplay structure. How to properly format. And I spent probably about 2 or 3 months reading as much information as I could. You would learn things. Like don't say, and they heard a sound, basic things like that, the do's and the don'ts. And I just started writing. From there, I would go back and reread what I wrote, because I was continuing to learn as I wrote, and I would read different things out of Sid Field's and on the web, and I would go back as I was editing and realize, typical noob mistakes that I had made, and it helped me to polish and bring the screenplay up to what it was in the end.
Okay, perfect. Did you get Final Draft? Did you start out with some sort of formatting software?
Yes, actually. I write exclusively on my phone using a program called Scripts Pro.
Okay. Perfect,
Yeah.
perfect. So let's talk about your actual day-to-day writing. It sounds like you didn't spend a lot of time outlining. Once you had the kernel, you actually started writing. So maybe you can talk us just through that process. What does a day look like when you're writing? Do you spend 10 hours a day just really trying to get pages out? Do you spend an hour per day writing a few pages over the course of many months? What does the days look like for you?
Both, really. There's some days where I would spend 8 to 10 hours writing and actually get a lot of pages out in that time, where I might spend the same amount of time and only get 1 or 2 pages, where there'd be particular areas of the story that would need a little bit more, mental gymnastics to figure out what's going to happen. But I would write every day, 7 days a week. Sometimes I have my day-to-day job as well, working as a character artist at an amusement park here in Tampa. But when I had any time that I had when I wasn't working, I would, my family would want to go to the beach and they would swim, and I would sit in my chair and write and write and write and write. So that's one thing that I love about working on my phone, is when you don't have a lot of time, when you need to make money in another job, you can take that device with you and write when you're on break, when you're have a few moments here or there. You can write a little bit here and there and just get it out there. You have these ideas that you want to put on paper, and if you don't have that opportunity, you have to wait till you get home to write, that you could lose it. So I'm really happy working with the phone.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about the development process. It sounds like Haynes was involved very early on. So at what point did you start actually sending him pages? And then how do you deal with the notes that you're getting back from him?
Well, when I wrote Crepitus, we both lived in the same town. So okay. It wasn't a matter of emailing him pages. It was I would write a fair amount, and then we would get together and we would read, and it was going really nicely, and he loved how it was developing. And from there, probably when I got about halfway through, I just soldiered through the rest of it and didn't send anything to him until it was all completed.
Okay. And were there some moments where you guys maybe had disagreements on characters or story or something, and how did you resolve any of those disagreements?
One great thing about working with Haynes, he and I started the Wix production company together, so we're very heavily involved, and we're going to work together on most of our projects in the future. Haynes and I have a very similar vision on things, and as far as disagreements, it does happen, but nothing major. He would just make suggestions about a particular aspect of the story, and it wasn't more of that he thought this particular idea was necessarily wrong, but maybe this would be better, to go in this direction. Yeah. And and it's really important to work with someone like him, being that I don't have a formal degree in film. He does, so he can look at the script, and say, okay, as far as putting this onto film, that might not work as well as maybe if we went this route.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about those next steps. Once you guys had a script that you were happy with, what did you do to start getting it out there and getting it to producers and actually raising the money to get this movie made?
Haynes had a friend that he had met several years ago, Lance Paul, who is our executive producer, and they had talked briefly from time to time about how they would like to work with each other one day. And we had mentioned that we were developing this screenplay called Crepitus, and he had just said, once you have something solid, send it my way and we'll take a look at it. So it was pretty lucky to have someone like this that he had known previously, because I understand that a lot of people have a difficult time sometimes just getting their screenplays read. So it was almost like we already had that door open to us, and he was willing to read whatever we had once we had completed it.
Yeah. So do you don't by chance know how Haynes met him originally years ago?
I honestly don't know, but I know he is involved in a lot of things in Atlanta, and it might have been when Haynes was working on a project that never actually made it off the ground. He was hired to direct it, and the whole project kind of fell apart before that ever happened. And I think when he was in Atlanta working on that project is when he met him.
I see. Perfect. So did you said this guy's name was Lance?
Lance Paul.
Okay. Now, when he got the script, did he have some notes? And I'd be curious to see how you address those.
No. He just read through the script and he really enjoyed it. It was kind of fun because when Haynes and I were first developing the screenplay, we were sitting around talking about, kind of fantasizing about who we would love to play Crepitus if we were to ever get this into someone's hands. And our first thought was Bill Moseley, that we always thought that, and I kind of had Bill in mind when I was writing the screenplay. And when we had given it to Lance, Lance had just got done doing a film called Dark Road 79, where he had worked with Bill. And so, we had mentioned that, it would be kind of fun to maybe have Bill in on the project. And he had, connections with his agent, and he agreed that maybe we should talk to Bill about this. Although, our finances were pretty slim at the time, we had written a bit part for Bill, like a 5-minute, day player that he would come in and add a little legitimacy to the film. And we sent the script over to Bill, and he read it and got word back to us that he really loved the script, but he had no interest in this little character. He wanted to be Crepitus. So.
Yeah. So, take us back. I know in your email you mentioned a little bit about doing a Kickstarter or crowdfunding campaign. Take us back and walk us through that. What was your plan there, and how did you execute on that?
That's another aspect where I, scoured the internet, and I had no idea. I've never run a Kickstarter before, so I watched many YouTube videos on people who claim to have known exactly how to do it with the do's and don'ts, and I put together an Indiegogo campaign based off of all the things that I learned from there. And our first campaign was very successful. We had a $5,000 limit, and we ended up raising just about $7,000. And we had already had a little bit of funding in place at the time, so that allowed us to start securing a lot of the aspects that we needed to move forward with production.
And then, did you bring Lance on after the crowdfunding campaign, or did you bring him on before?
We brought him on before, although until Bill Moseley was really on board. Until we tried to get Bill Moseley on board, that's when he really came on and started working as the producer on the film.
I see. And was your plan originally just to shoot this for $7,000 or whatever you could raise on?
No. We were hoping to maybe raise somewhere between 30 and 50,000.
Okay. Perfect. So, do you know what you're going to be working on next? You had mentioned that you had another script already that you're already working on.
Actually, let me go back really quick with
Sure.
the Indiegogo. One of the main reasons for the Indiegogo, other than $7,000 is when you're trying to raise 50 isn't quite enough, but one of the important aspects of the Indiegogo is to show that there is interest in the project, that people are looking at this and giving you money, that they're excited about it. And you can show this to potential investors as well and say that, yes, people are excited, they're interested, they want. And so the fact that the Indiegogo was successful did help us in finding other investors that were willing to put more additional funds into the project.
I see. And were you involved in bringing on some of those additional investors?
Yes, I've this whole process for me has been like this crazy whirlwind, all points college course in filmmaking. Like I've been involved in of course I wrote the screenplay. I've been bringing in investors. I've done most of the publicity writing. Taught myself how to write press releases. A lot of the stories that have been written about the film have been from the press releases that I've written, as well as just getting out there and getting people excited. I've run all the Facebook page, the Twitter page, all the
I see.
social aspect. Yeah.
So maybe we can talk just briefly about bringing on these investors. How did you find investors, and what was your pitch to them? What did that look like?
I would let them know that the clown genre right now is very popular, especially with It coming out. Mm-hmm. That we have a horror icon, Bill Moseley, attached. That we have a very experienced cinematographer coming on board. I would just point to them all the aspects that help to de-risk an investment. When you're investing in film, it's always a risky venture. Even if the best intentions, projects still fall apart. So it's important to let people know who are interested in investing exactly what about this investment is de-risking. Mm-hmm. All the aspects of that. And later on, once the project developed even more, we had a production company or a distribution company that wants to take on the film afterwards, and we still had a few investors that we wanted to bring on, and so letting them know that distribution is set up was also a huge de-risking factor.
Mm-hmm. And just literally, who are these potential investors? Are they family, friends of friends? How did you actually find those people to even pitch?
Yeah, no family or friends were involved in the investing.
Thank goodness.
Right. But they were, for example, one of the investors came from just going on to Facebook groups that are meant for promoting your product. So you would write a little pitch of the film and what you're looking for, and looking for investors. Contact us. So we had a couple of great guys that are part of the film, who agreed to invest a certain amount if they were able to actually be in the film, because they were actors that are looking to further their career. So, and I think that's actually pretty common, where upcoming actors will become producers and invest in the film in exchange for roles. And the rest of them were people who I discovered on Facebook in other people's friends lists, and who were producers, and I would just send them a random message saying, introducing who I am and telling them about the project and if you'd be interested in coming on board. And 99% of the time they don't answer you. 1%, half a percent of the time they answer you politely or impolitely about that they're not interested at all. And then the very few scattered here and there actually show a little bit of interest. And I think that's pretty common on how that goes. A lot of people already have a project that they put all their money into, but eventually persistence, the laws of averages. If you keep asking and you ask enough people, eventually someone will say yes.
Yeah. And do you have any sense of how many of these sorts of pitches, Facebook messages you sent? Are we talking about dozens or hundreds or thousands?
I'd probably easily somewhere between 1,500 to 3,000 or 4,000.
Okay, so a good number. Okay, yeah.
Oh yeah, I've on many occasions have been put in Facebook temporary jail for sending too many messages in the course of an hour.
Yeah. So, and how many investors out of these 1,500 to 3,000 queries that you sent? How many people ultimately ended up investing because of that?
Like 5 or 6.
Okay, so yeah, that's good to know. Okay, so what's next for you? You had mentioned you were working on another. Actually, let's get that question next. Let's talk about the clown genre for a minute. I know you just mentioned that your film definitely has a clown featured prominently. How does your film compare to the film that's coming out, the Stephen King film It that's coming out?
Well, there's a lot of folks naturally will compare our film to It because it does involve a clown that eats children, and ultimately it will excite some people about it, and others will claim that it's a ripoff of It. But aside from the fact that Pennywise from It and Crepitus from our film enjoy the same diet, that's about where the similarities end. Both of them have that similarity, but when you see the two, it's really hard to tell you why without actually seeing the film. But when you do see them and you see them side by side, if you watch both films, you will see that the stories are completely different.
Yeah. Okay. So what's next for you? Let's talk about your next screenplay.
Well, there's not a whole lot that I can say about it right now because the distribution company that is interested in it, like I can't even name that yet, but they had mentioned that right now Westerns and World War II stories are what's hot. And if we were able to give them a screenplay for either of those two genres that could be shot for under $500,000, that they would definitely be interested in backing it and distributing it. So I sat down and with Haynes, and we bounced some ideas around again, and we came up with this great concept. And I wish I could say more about it, but I just can't. But we pitched it to them, and they loved it. So they told us to go ahead and develop this screenplay. But it's going to be a Western. Of the two, it's going to be a Western for sure.
Okay, perfect.
And we're also allowed to add a little bit of a horror aspect to it, which is actually how I originally found your podcast, because of the interview that you did with the director and writer of with Kurt Russell, Bone Tomahawk.
Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah. That's how I originally discovered your podcast, and it's going to be a horror Western, although the horror aspect is definitely realistic horror. Like you could kind of have it be a cross-up between Unforgiven and Seven.
Okay. Perfect. I wanted to go back on one thing you said. You said at the beginning of the interview you were doing storyboards for Haynes. I'm curious, was that something you were doing a lot of? And the reason I asked, when you said that you had sent out 1,500 to 3,000 of these Facebook-type queries, I just all of a sudden occurred to me, maybe you were doing this a lot, maybe you were meeting a lot of filmmakers, and this is just the one relationship that for whatever reason sort of took off. Were you doing storyboards for other filmmakers as well?
No, This just my relationship with Haynes is where this all began, and where it's continuing to go forward. I did all my storyboards, a complete set for Crepitus, and the previous film almost a complete set for Asylum of Secrets, and I have yet to do any other storyboards for anyone else.
Okay, perfect. Do you know the release schedule of Crepitus? When is it going to be going to come out, and how can people check it out?
It sounds like we're going to most likely get a limited theatrical release to start with, and we're aiming at somewhere between mid-October to mid-November as a release.
Okay, perfect. What's
and then obviously after that, Netflix or DVD. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. What's the best way for people to keep up with you and kind of what you're doing? Facebook, Twitter, anything you're comfortable sharing, just give us that now, and then I'll round it up as well and put it in the show notes.
You can contact us through Facebook at facebook.com/Crepitusfilm or Twitter at Crepitusfilm.
Okay.
And, I would like to, if I may,
sure.
Also, talk about, we had talked about this a little bit in the past, but my wife, Sarah Renner, also had a bit to do with the writing of Crepitus. Initially, seeing that I'm not the best at grammar, and she was my editor, and I gave her the script to look through and make sure everything, all the T's were, crossed and I's were dotted, and she's also a very talented writer, and she started coming up with some ideas of her own that perhaps the story would be nicer to progress in certain areas, and they were great ideas. So she ended up writing perhaps like a good quarter of the screenplay. Crepitus himself is a rhyming clown. Everything he says is in rhymes, and she wrote quite a few of the rhymes as well that Bill Moseley speaks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, very, very nice. So, Eddie, I really appreciate your reaching out to me and coming on the podcast. Fascinating story, and just persistence really, I think, wins the day here, and I think that's great for people to hear.
Yeah, I just, when I was learning how to write a screenplay, one thing I found consistently was how people have a really hard time oftentimes getting someone to read their screenplay, because there's so many people. It's not that their screenplays are necessarily bad, it's just that they're one of thousands that are trying to get their screenplay into one person to see. And so Haynes and I decided that the best approach would be to try to do this ourselves, try to kind of do an end run around instead of trying to get someone to look at it. We would make something first, which we did. That's another thing, is we did a sizzle trailer where we got some local actors to play the parts, and that's another way that we got people really interested in the project. And so we decided to create most of it ourselves before, and create a buzz, like people were writing stories about this before, in news articles about this before, anybody really came on board to invest. And that's one thing that I think is great about the day and age we live in, is the internet, to be able to reach out to more people. You can do these things without, in a non-traditional method.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, once again, Eddie, I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking with me today. I wish you luck with this film and all your future films.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fun.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, characters, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write a logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase the logline and synopsis writing service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your script gets a recommend from a reader, you get a free email and fax blast to my list of industry contacts. This is the exact same blast service I use myself to promote my own scripts, and it's the same service I sell on the website. It's a great way to get your script into the hands of producers who are looking for material. So if you want a professional valuation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. So just a quick shout out to screenwriter George Cohen, who used the SYS email and fax blast service a while back. He ended up optioning a script through the blast service, and then he built a relationship with that optioning producer and has since optioned several other scripts to that same producer. So that's fantastic. Congratulations, George. That's exactly how the email and fax blast service can work for you. A lot of times it's not so much about the sale or the option of the initial script. It's about building a relationship with a producer and then getting to know them and getting them to like you as a writer and to work with them on other projects. Certainly having a bunch of these types of producers in your network is great. So again, congratulations to George. I added a little blurb about this option to the SYS successes page. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that and see some of the other successes through the SYS Select services, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Also, if you've had any success with the SYS Select services, please do let me know. It's inspiring to hear these success stories, so I'd love to share your story either on our success page or maybe even on the podcast. So to wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Eddie. The thing that really struck out to me when I first was emailing with Eddie about the interview, he was sort of telling his story in sort of the broad strokes about how he wrote this script and it got produced. And I thought, gee, this is kind of a real lucky break for this guy. And as you dig into this story deeper, and it's great that Eddie came on and was willing to share all this, you start to really hear the effort that it took. I mean, sending hundreds and even thousands of, blind queries through Facebook trying to raise money for this thing. That's the kind of effort it takes. And I love hearing those stories, and I love people like Eddie that are willing to come on and share them, because I hope that that's good for people that are listening to the podcast. They understand that sometimes it's more than just writing a script. Sometimes there's a little bit of luck involved, but in almost all cases, there's a lot of hard work. And, if you haven't sent out, hundreds or even thousands of query letters trying to raise money for your film, maybe that's why Eddie is doing it. And maybe that's why you haven't had that first produced credit yet, is you just haven't put forth the effort like what Eddie really describes there. So I really hope his story is inspirational to you. I mean, when I hear these stories, it just gets me thinking, gee, what more could I be doing to move my own projects ahead? Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.